These are remarkable stories.
I did try and escape from the prison in Quito. We were planning all sorts of ways of getting out of there. Everything from a helicopter lift off the roof to an RPG strike on the exterior wall, because the Colombian guys that I was hooked up with were ex-FARC. Anyway, we opted for the cheaper one, the tunnel. And the guards got wind of me planning a fuga masiva, as they called it, which was massive escape. Me and the Colombians all got split up and sent to different prisons all around the country, and I got sent to the fourth most dangerous prison in South America. There was like 5 or 6 murders a week, bodies turning up in the rubbish, heads here, limbs all over the place. I mean, there were gunfights on a frequent basis. The original gang that was in there, who were called the Cubanos, decided to take out the Choneros. About 9:30 at night, mid-October, I was cooking some food, me and the German guy, cooking spaghetti bolognese. And one of the Choneros asked me for a plate of food, so I said, yeah, no problem. So I went to give him the food, knocked on the door of his room, and the other gang, the Cubanos, had obviously been watching me do this and used me as cover to kill this guy. So one of them's come up behind me and opened fire over my right shoulder, shot this guy straight in the face, blown the back of his head out, and a 2-hour gunfight ensued. At least one other person was killed, there were about 15 injured. And then the police came in and tortured everybody for another 2 hours until they found out what had happened. And I mean, when I say tortured, I mean they were drowning people, electrocuting people. Because the police would come in and execute gang members. They would just take them out into the exercise yard if they were causing too much trouble and just shoot them in the head and say they tried to escape.
Where was your girlfriend at this point?
She gets taken to the women's prison. And, you know, I promised her, I said, look, I will do whatever I have to do to get you out of here. Which I did. I ended up having to basically go guilty and say, yeah, it was me, I was trafficking the drugs, she's nothing to do with it. I ended up in total spending about £130,000 on lawyers and bribes, you know, paying off the judge, paying off the police, paying off whoever I could, to not get 25 years and to get her released. So she gets released after 3 or 4 months. And I said to her, I said, please do not go back to Britain, because the British police will arrest you. They will try and convict you, because I'm not there and I just know how the British police work. And she kept saying, I'm not involved, I've got a young daughter. Why would they arrest me? I haven't done anything wrong, which was true. Sure enough, she goes back to Britain against my wishes and my recommendation. And pretty much as soon as she arrives back in Stroud, she gets arrested, and they end up sentencing her to 13 years in a British prison. The British police said that she'd been transporting drugs for me, which she never, ever once did. Never. Why would I use my girlfriend when I had dozens of passengers, mules? I'm hardly going to put my girlfriend in risk and use her, am I? The evidence that the police had for this was the fact that they found traces of cocaine on some of her luggage. The bags that she was using were rucksacks that I had given her. There was cocaine all around me, all over everything, nearly all of the time. Of course there's going to be traces of cocaine on those bags. I mean, honestly, it really pisses me off, even now, when I think about it and what she went through, when she shouldn't have ever gone to prison. She did 7 years. And I mean, what? 7 years for what? For being my girlfriend, basically. I mean, just absolutely outrageous. Her legal team in Britain must have been absolutely shit.
Peter Tritton was a very successful drug smuggler, but now he paints houses. Because 10 years of hell in an Ecuadorian prison will change a man's point of view. Peter told his tale to Mike McDowell.
I very first became involved in the drug trade at a very young age of around 12. My dad used to smoke hash back in the day. He was a bit of a hippie. At the age of 10, my parents divorced, and my mum got together with one of my dad's oldest friends, who had two sons that were both older than me, but I'd known since a very young age. And the eldest of those two was a DJ and heavily involved in the illegal rave scene back at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. So I started tagging along to illegal raves, at the age of 12 or 13. I think I first smoked hash at the age of 12. And then quickly sort of realised that I could make money at these illegal raves by selling drugs. Started going to these parties every weekend, sometimes for 3 or 4 days. And, because it was so lawless at that time, the police would just stand on the periphery and not really get involved. So it was very easy to sell drugs and, carry on doing illicit things within the party. Also, the fact that I didn't have much money at home, or there wasn't much money at home. It was a way of funding the partying, as well as a bit extra.
How old were you when you first sold drugs then?
Probably, it can't have been any more than 14.
And at that point, was it just weed?
Yeah, started with hash, and that quickly went on to selling pills at the weekend, ecstasy pills, amphetamine, and then LSD a bit later on.
How did you get on at school?
Pretty well, actually. I did, surprisingly enough. I always get asked this. I was actually very academic, and I was the captain of the school cricket team. I played in the rugby team for the entire time I was there. I was in the top 5 long-distance runners in the school. Nearly ran for the county. In fact, nearly played cricket for the county. And when it came to GCSEs, I got all A's and B's. Went off to Sixth Form College in Cirencester. And midway through my A-levels, I got arrested as I was leaving for college one morning with 2 ounces of hashish cut up into deals down my boxer shorts. And 2 plainclothes police officers knocked on the door as I was about to leave. Obviously grabbed me. I get searched eventually and they find it. But luckily for me, even though the college had expelled me, they said that I could sit my A-levels. So I studied at home on my own, and in the end gained 4 A-levels. Managed to get 4 offers at university to read archaeology. Opted for Cardiff, mainly because it was close to home. My mum was, by this point, quite a heavy alcoholic. So I kind of wanted to be near enough to be able to get back in an emergency.
At this point, I'm going to cut in and give a little bit of an explanation for our international audience. GCSEs are exams that you take at the age of around 16, and that leads you to A-levels. A-levels are the exams that you take at the age of 18, and this gave you a place at university to study archaeology, right?
I wanted to do medicine, really, but I didn't have because of the length of the course being 6 years, I didn't have the financial backing to carry on that long. I didn't have any financial backing at all. So I went off to university in Cardiff, and trying to survive on a student loan was not easy, and there were a lot of students running around, looking to buy drugs and not really having a source or a connection to find them. So I quickly realised that there was a lot of money to be made fairly easily, and decided stupidly to start again. So through my local contacts back in Stroud, started bringing down the usual sort of party drugs like the hash, the weed, ecstasy, amphetamine. But it was at this point that I first became involved with cocaine properly. One of the students, a guy from Southampton, was adamant that he wanted to buy some coke. So I think the first bit was like half an ounce. Brought that down for him, and then started bringing down, an ounce or 2 on a regular basis. And that very quickly developed into me meeting the local dealers around Cardiff, asking them if they would introduce me to the people that had previously been supplying them, to see if I in turn could supply their dealers or previous suppliers, if you see what I mean. To begin with, it was just local dealers in Cardiff, but then quite soon after I met dealers from all across South Wales, from the valleys, Swansea, Bridgend, Port Talbot, all the way across. And obviously the amounts increased rapidly. So from that first half an ounce, within 6 months I was bringing 2-3 kilos of coke down to Cardiff every week, or probably more than that actually. And a lot of hash, sometimes 500 kilos at a time, sometimes more.
How much money are we talking about?
I've worked it out. Some days I'd make £10,000 in an hour. Average on a month, I was probably about 30,000.
£30,000?
Somewhere around there. The local dealer back in Stroud that I'd been sourcing it from got a bit sort of scared about the quantities and decided to put me in touch with his supplier, who was a guy from near Oxford. I then start going up to London with him, meet his suppliers. He introduces me to his guys up in London. So very quickly I've skipped from, buying a half ounce in Stroud to suddenly getting 2, 3, 4 kilos up in London on credit. It's a very different ball game altogether. Yeah. What was the next question?
If you're bringing 2, 3, 4 kilos of cocaine from London, you must have been getting involved with some pretty dangerous characters.
Yeah. Unbeknownst to me, I suppose you've probably heard of the Addams family from North London.
I have, yes.
Inadvertently, I was being supplied by them and some other pretty heavy people up in London.
Were you employing people at this point to fetch and carry?
No, I was very much a sole trader, as I like to say. Generally, I was working on my own.
Did you have a plan at this point? Was drug dealing your long-term goal, or did you have other ideas?
No, the long-term goal was always to make enough money to start a business of some sort. I wanted to get into property, but then some things went wrong and I ended up heavily in debt after a couple of kilos of coke went missing in Bristol. I dropped out of uni midway through the second year, moved to Bristol. Things expanded into the Bristol area, met some of the big people over there, started supplying them large scale amounts of all sorts of stuff, and got arrested in 2000. Walked into the middle of a surveillance operation on some other guys up in the Cotswolds near Bourton-on-the-Water, and as I left the property that was under surveillance, I got into a van, drove off up the road, and a police car came up behind me, pulled me over, and I thought it was a routine traffic stop initially, but it very quickly transpired that it wasn't, and they immediately went to the drugs that were in a black briefcase, broke it open with a crowbar and went, oh wow, look. So, I was arrested. Took them a while to find the property that I was renting in Slad, the village where Laurie Lee sided with Rosie. I was renting a big manor house in the bottom of the valley called Steambridge Court, in quite luxurious setting. So yeah, they found the place anyway, found more drugs, found a sawn-off shotgun and ammunition, and I ended up getting sentenced to 5 years for that, which was not bad, but I was held as a potential Category A prisoner, which is high security, throughout my time on remand at Gloucester. I was the only potential A category prisoner in the whole prison, and the first one they'd had there in 15 years. Why
were you a Category A prisoner?
Because of my associations up in London. They viewed me as intelligent, and if you're intelligent in prison, it goes against you heavily, because they view you as being able to manipulate other people or the situation and much more of a flight risk or escape risk.
Had you resigned yourself already to the fact that at some point you would have another brush with the law?
I actually remember saying to my co-defendants and other people in when I was in prison that I had a feeling that I would have one more adventure or escapade or whatever, and it probably end up getting sentenced to 15 years. And I wasn't far wrong. I ended up getting sentenced to 12 years in Ecuador. You know, I wasn't planning to start selling drugs again because I'd seen how it devastated my family, particularly my mum, obviously, with her problems. And whilst in prison, I trained to be a painter and decorator. And, you know, when I got out, my dad helped me set up my own business and planned to go straight. But as soon as I was out of the prison gates, there were people calling me saying, "Oh, do you fancy doing this? Or can you get this? Or do you want to be involved in this deal that we're doing?" Or, you know, all sorts of stuff. And I just kept saying no. There was no way I could go back to doing wholesale drug dealing throughout Britain because I was, you know, obviously I was well known to the police by this point.
How old were you when you were released from prison?
I came out in 2002, so I was probably, I was born in 76, you do the maths.
25.
Yeah, something around that, yeah.
And did you already have contacts in South America?
No. So that all came about, basically, you know, sat in Parkhurst, and I was reading I used to get the Sunday Times once a week, and I came across this article about these guys who had imported a load of cocaine impregnated into plastic garden furniture, you know, like patio sets. Somehow it had been captured, and I just thought this was absolutely a genius idea, bearing in mind 9/11 had just happened, and all the security at the airports and seaports had gone, you know, it was on maximum alert. So loads of drug mules and people transporting cocaine and powder were being caught at the border inadvertently by customs and excise because of the heightened security. And I realised that if you wanted to bring cocaine into Britain, in those days, that bringing it in powder form was finished. There was no way that sort of, you know, chuck it in a suitcase and get on a plane and fly home was going to carry on. But when I heard about this method of putting it into plastic, I was like, wow, that's really pretty cool, and definitely the future of drug trafficking, or certainly cocaine trafficking. And I'd said to my codees whilst we were in Parkhurst, I said, look, when we get out, if we go back to doing anything, the only thing I really want to do is bring cocaine in, simply because it's small in volume and high in value, as opposed to trying to bring in a ton of hashish. Oops. Shush. Hold on a minute, sorry. Wait, Tilly. Shh. Lie down.
You were in Parkhurst prison. You mentioned your codees, and I should say that's co-defendant. So you were in prison with the rest of your gang.
Yeah, they ended up they ended up getting transported down to Parkhurst as well. When I was arrested, it was just me initially. Shush. They carried on doing something else and got arrested. I think it was about 6 to 8 months later. And the judge tried to say that we were, as you said, a gang, but we weren't really. I mean, I was supplying them, and, you know, that was it really. We weren't. It wasn't like we were a gang or.
What led you then to Ecuador?
I'd sort of started dabbling in drugs again at the weekend and came to the realisation that painting and decorating wasn't going to make me a millionaire, and it was hard graft, and I just had a bad day, I think. I just got sick of painting and decorating, and the day came where somebody called me and I said, you know what, fuck it, let's do something. So initially I made a phone call to the guy in Oxford, or near Oxford, and I said, look, can you try and find me a source for cocaine from South America? Can you, basically, can you get hold of some Colombians up in London or something? and see if we can put a joint deal together. You know, I'm bringing a lot of a big customer base to the table, logistics, and all sorts of other stuff that they probably would like to have. What I need is a source of cocaine so that we can bring it into Britain. So the guy out near Oxford makes the phone calls, manages to find a Colombian up in London who's willing to talk to me. So initially we go up on the premise that I'm wanting to buy a kilo of coke, which I was for somebody in South Wales. So we go up, we do a couple of deals, and on the second or third time up there, I said, look, really, the reason I'm here is because I want to start bringing cocaine into Britain myself. Would you be up for teaming up with me and, you know, putting something together? And they turned around and said, well, actually, as it happens, we are already bringing cocaine into the country, impregnated in rubber in the ground sheets of tents. And I was like, seriously? No way. That is it. You know, basically, you know, that was the plan that I had, to bring it in plastic or rubber. And they were already doing it. So it felt to me like it was... I'm quite a strong believer in destiny. And it really did feel like that was supposed to happen.
So the plan was to bring the cocaine into the UK, impregnated into the rubber ground sheets of tents. And who was making the cocaine impregnated rubber for you?
That was through the Colombians contacting Cali. So it was through basically working in conjunction with members of the Cali cartel. One of the Colombians' contacts out there was quite heavily involved with the cartel, and he dealt with all of that end, sourced the cocaine, had the cocaine made into sheets of impregnated rubber, disguised in the ground sheets of the tents. We would then find a passenger, a mule, to go and collect it and bring it back to Britain.
Why did you not simply have the tents delivered? Why couldn't you post them?
We did do things through the post as well, but not in tents, in other things. That was never actually brought up in court. We also had a shipment come in from Brazil inside rock crystal statuettes and statues. The ultimate plan was, and we were just about to start doing this when everything went wrong, basically. The plan was to upscale things and bring it in by shipping container, simply because it was a lot easier not to involve mules and passengers and so many people. And obviously, bringing it in by shipping container, we could bring in a lot larger amount. Using the same method, but just a far greater quantity. We were planning to start with 100 kilos, and then it would have been 2 and then 4, then probably a ton.
How much cocaine could you impregnate into the ground sheet of a tent?
I mean, it depends how big the tent was, but I mean, on average, it was between 3 and 5 kilos. We tried to do one of those every month, and we'd make about 180,000 to 200,000 pounds. Obviously, you know, we had costs. We had to pay the passenger. We'd pay them about £12,000 plus all their expenses. The tent overall for one with 5 kilos in was costing about £30,000.
So you were bringing in about £200,000 every month.
That was split between 3 minus cost. So we'd normally each end up with about 50,000.
And that was every single month?
More or less. Sometimes we did 2 at the same time.
And who were the people who travelled with the tents and brought them in their luggage? Presumably you didn't do this because you were already on the...
I did the first one simply because I didn't want to be sending in people to do something that I hadn't already done. So I took a big risk in doing the first one, bearing in mind I hadn't been out of prison that long. And I actually got stopped when I arrived in Holland because there was no direct flight to England. So I leave Quito on KLM, which routes through Holland. And when I arrived in Holland, there was a row of anti-narcotic agents, Dutch police. And as soon as they saw me, they obviously recognised me or had a picture of me. And sure enough, I got pulled in for questioning. And luckily, because I was in transit, the tent was taken from the plane I was on to the plane that was going to England, because it was in the hold. I don't know whether they just didn't check it or what, but they allowed me to carry on through. And getting back to Britain, I thought, well, I'm bound to get arrested here. I thought if I've already been stopped by the Dutch police, I'm bound to get stopped by the British, and I didn't. There was no one there. Landed, got the tent, walked out of the airport, couldn't believe it. The fact that I'd been stopped by the Dutch police and got away with it was just, I was hooked at that point. I was just like, wow, this truly does beat all the systems that they've got, because it couldn't be detected by X-ray, it can't be detected by the scanner, the dogs couldn't get it. We used to be able to counter the reactive test, the liquid test that they do, by putting another chemical in. So that's pretty much all of their tests that they do.
When you are standing in a queue at an airport, and there are a few people ahead of you, but you can see the anti-narcotics agents.
Yeah, because I was at the back of the row as well.
So you can see the drug squad officers in Amsterdam at Schiphol Airport staring at you. They've obviously got your picture.
Yeah.
You'd already done, at that point, a few years, 3 and some months, years in prison, partly in Parkhurst. What goes through your mind when you're standing in that queue?
Well, I mean, I just tried to be as cool and calm and collected as I could be. I thought, there's nothing I could do, was there? I mean, I'm in it. I'm in the situation. I've just got to deal with it now, and whatever happens, happens.
But is your heart pounding?
I was a little bit nervous, but not particularly.
Geez, you must have nerves of steel.
A lot of people have said this. I am very cool and calm and collected in situations of high pressure and stress and stuff like that.
Where were you getting the cocaine in South America? You were getting it from the Cali cartel in Colombia. Why were you moving in and out of Ecuador, the neighbouring country?
I mean, we trafficked out of Ecuador and Venezuela simply because neither of those two countries really produces cocaine themselves. They're just mainly transit routes. There's generally less control at the borders and less heat when you're landing in Europe.
Were you not worried that you could end up in a ditch somewhere?
I nearly did, actually. On one occasion, I actually went to view 100 kilos of cocaine. We drove to the port of Buenaventura, or the port city on the Pacific, which is a really dangerous city. This is with the contact in Cali, Comandante, as we used to call him, because he was ex-military. He'd been involved with the paramilitaries and with FARC, so he had quite a lot of clearance with all of them, because he was involved with the Cali cartel and the cocaine trafficking. That's how they all make their money, isn't it? So anyway, we go down to Buenaventura and go into this house, and there's two guys in there, and there's a gun on the table straight away, a big revolver. And I was like, wow, look at this. And I can tell there's tension. I start hearing the word MI5, I kept hearing, and police, and I'm thinking, oh fuck, do these people think I'm MI5? And they're looking at me, and at this point my Spanish is pretty non-existent. I said, I'm not police. I've just come out of prison. I was in Parkhurst. As soon as I said Parkhurst in prison, one of the guys that was getting all upset starts speaking English out of nowhere and says, oh, amigo, I was in prison in the Verne, which is it's just across the water from Parkhurst, basically, in Weymouth. And I said, well, do you know this guy called Simon? And he goes, oh, yeah. And unbelievably, he knew this friend of mine who'd been in prison with him at the same time, and that saved my life, basically. I think if that hadn't have been the case and he hadn't have spoken English, I probably would have ended up dead that evening. But it was scary.
Tell me about how you went about extracting the cocaine from the rubber.
Me, the Colombian and the Chilean, we all had our sort of individual roles to play in the organisation, as I called it, much like a business. So the Colombian, he was in charge of sourcing, getting the cocaine, getting it made into the tent, blah blah blah. My role was really the logistics, getting it back, getting the passengers, wholesaling it. And then the Chilean's role was finding locations for the labs, getting the chemicals, which I sometimes assisted with, and taking care of the extraction. Initially, they would find a location. We had to have somewhere with an electric hob, because of the alcohol that we were evaporating off is highly explosive, and we couldn't have any naked gas flames. We had to have a powerful extractor fan in the hood of the cooker to take out all the fumes. So those were the two key things that we had to have in any location or property, as well as being reasonably safe. We had to source the chemicals: acetone, methanol, ether, hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid. And a lot of these big chemical companies won't just sell to the general public. So we had to falsify companies, we had to make front companies. We would chop the rubber up into as small pieces as we could to maximise the surface area. It would be soaked in one of the alcohols for 24 hours to bring the cocaine into solution again. We would then add a couple of other acids to it and some other alcohols. That whole solution would then be evaporated off, leaving pure cocaine in powder form. So if we brought 5 kilograms of pure cocaine in, we would lose a little bit in the extraction process. Say if it was 5 kilos, we'd probably end up with 4.5, which we would then cut and end up with 6 or 7, which would then be sold for around 25 to 30,000 pounds each.
One of your colleagues in this enterprise was arrested.
Yeah, the Colombian.
And he became an informer.
Yeah. When the police raided the laboratory in Crystal Palace, he was present, and the Chilean. So basically both my business partners got arrested, along with a few other South Americans in there who shouldn't have been there. I'm then left holding the reins. I carry on doing everything on my own. The Colombian manages to get access to a mobile telephone in the prison, so before I realise that he's an informant, we start doing things, setting things up whilst he's in prison. Carry on bringing the stuff into Britain. I team up with another Colombian who was a chemist and started doing things with him on a separate venture. The first Colombian, my original business partner, gets released after 6 months, which at the time was suspicious. And not long after he's out, I start seeing that I'm under surveillance. I can see that I'm being followed. We were changing our telephones every 2 weeks completely. Not just changing the chip, we changed everything. That just go out and buy a new phone. So all of the people involved in the enterprise would just buy new telephones on the same day, exchange their telephone numbers face to face, and then do the same 2 weeks later. But really, the telephones we only ever used to set up meetings. We would never talk about anything delicate on them. We would then walk out into the middle of a field, well away from any buildings, no electronics around us whatsoever, and then have a conversation.
At this point, did you also have a London police officer on your payroll?
Yeah, not long after, I got introduced to an Asian guy who didn't know that I was involved with drugs. The meeting came through some friends up in London who were massively involved in multi-million pound frauds. He did a background check on me, unbeknownst to me, through this bent police officer that he had on his payroll. And suddenly I got a phone call from him about a week later saying, "Jesus Christ, why didn't you tell me you're involved in drugs? You've got a massive police operation around you." I then knew for sure that I was definitely being watched. So I said to him, "Look, produce some of the surveillance notes so I can verify whether or not they tally with our movements. Then I'll know that they're genuine." So they produced some of the surveillance notes. I mean, this police officer must have been quite high ranking, to be able to clear the security levels. I never met him, but basically I started paying him a retainer every week.
At this point, though, you've figured out that you are the subject of a pretty significant surveillance operation. That has been confirmed by you're assuming, fairly senior officer in London's Metropolitan Police Force. You're an intelligent man. Why did you not just gather together the money that you'd made, which must have been fairly significant at that point, and just go and hide out somewhere for a while? Just go to ground, just go to Thailand.
Well, this is exactly what I planned to do, actually. We carried on for a while because, I just thought that we could get away with it for quite a while longer, which we did, up until the point that the laboratory in Edinburgh got raided and I was nearly caught in the act. And at that point I knew the game was up. So I knew it was going to take probably about a month for the forensics to come back on that flat, at which point I get smuggled out of the country by the Turkish mafia, by a friend of mine who was involved with them. He put me in the boot of his Mercedes car and took me over to France on the hover speed. I closed down all my bank accounts, emptied out all the money, dropped all my electronic communications, but literally disappeared. Went to France, picked up from there, started doing a couple more deals, brought a couple more tents in, and planned to go to Thailand, as you said.
Did the British police know that you were hiding out in France?
They actually told me that they thought I was on the French-Spanish border, because that's what I was telling the Colombian. I said, I'm down near the Pyrenees somewhere. So decided to do that one last job, go out to Ecuador, and that was literally going to be the last job, and then go to Thailand. And the Colombian told the police and said, look, this is your last chance to get him. Same sort of thing happened as with the Dutch police. When I arrived, I'm coming down the stairs at the airport in Quito to the border control, and there was a woman at the bottom with a clipboard, and she obviously had my picture on that clipboard. And as soon as she saw me, she did a double take, had a good look at me again, another look at the clipboard, went away. I get to the passport control, and there she is with her senior officer. They take my passport, and this had never happened coming through Ecuador, not coming into Ecuador, not once. And I'd been through there 4 or 5 times, and there's obviously a problem. And yeah, I mean, really, at that point I should have walked away as soon as that happened. But the fact that they let me go on, I thought, perhaps I'm okay after all.
Wait a minute, so you were stopped. There was a woman with a clipboard, which obviously had your photograph on. They let you go on, and they let you carry on about your business, but you must have known at that point that the game was up.
Yeah, but I mean, bearing in mind, I'd been under heavy surveillance in Britain for ages by this point, and hadn't been arrested. So I thought, well, I can probably get away with it here. I wasn't going to have the tent around me for very long, and I was waiting for a mule to come over from Britain to collect it. I thought the point at which there might be a problem was when the tent was leaving the country, not in the centre of Quito. I mean, on one occasion in Venezuela, we were under heavy surveillance there, and we got through 2 tents in one go, right under the noses of the police, and into Britain. So, having done that, I just thought, well, I've done it before, I can do it again. And it was going to be the last one. So I thought, well, I'll just take the risk, do this last job, and head out to Thailand. And, it just wasn't to be. Me and my girlfriend, who had just arrived there, she'd only been in the country 4 hours. We'd been out to dinner, went back to the hotel, got in the elevator, went up to the top floor, and as soon as I put the key card in the door, it was Quieto, manos arriba, and somos policía de Ecuador, and blah, blah, blah. And there were plainclothes police charging down the corridor, guns drawn, pointed at us, with balaclavas on, so it was pretty scary. I mean, they were on us in seconds, and took us into the hotel room, which they had obviously been in whilst we'd been out, because they went straight to the closet that I had the tent in, and pulled it out, and were like, oh wow, look, what's this, and I was like, I don't know, it's a tent, what do you think it is? They were like, well, we know it's cocaine. And I said, look, guys, is there not some other way that we can do this? I said, I've got 20,000 euros on me now, and I'll get you another 20,000 the day after, or something like that. And they turned around and they said to me, we're the Ecuadorian police, we're not corrupt, who do you think we are? I was like, you are joking, aren't you? I said, you're I laughed. I said, you're some of the most corrupt police on the planet. But as soon as they said that, I knew that the British police were there somewhere in the background, and that I was pretty well done for. So me and my girlfriend get both taken to the Interpol police station, which, oddly enough, is right in front of the airport. So you can hear the planes taking off, wishing that you were on that plane going home and not sat in the police station, which was like a dungeon. And spent 5, nearly 6 weeks there. They wouldn't provide any food or drinks, so we had to get the embassy to start bringing food in for us. I literally saw the sun for 10 minutes in the 6 weeks I was there. They only took us out once. Yeah, I mean, it was just horrific. At the time I was in the Interpol holding cells, there were also some Arabs there who had been arrested on terrorism charges. They'd been shipping cocaine to Israel and Lebanon, and they were getting the money from selling the cocaine and buying weapons for Hezbollah. So became quite friendly with them because they spoke English and they were pretty cool. And they ended up introducing me to their lawyer, who I took on as my lawyer, and we all became good friends. And after 6 weeks we eventually got moved on to the remand centre, and the reason that we'd been not able to move forward in the system was because there was a riot in the prison, and basically the prisoners had taken over the prison and barricaded the gates, and they weren't letting any people move into the prison, so there was like a backlog. So we get to the remand centre in Quito, in the old part of Quito, and managed to bribe our way out of there. We only spent about a week or two there because it was pretty basic. And we get moved into the main prison, so I go at the same time as the Arabs, so I'm sort of viewed as part of their little gang, and they had a lot of respect in the prison, luckily for me. A friend of theirs was running the wing that we went on to, an Egyptian guy, so we get taken onto the wing that was mainly for foreigners, which was C wing. There was D wing which was mainly Colombian, and then B wing, which is mainly Ecuadorian. The prison itself was it was exactly the same as a Victorian prison in Britain. So it had the circular centre and the wings coming off it like the spokes of a wheel. So, if you wanted to cross into another wing, you had to go through the centre. So just like a Victorian prison in Britain. So it was almost the same as the prison I'd been in Gloucester, which was a Victorian prison, so very similar. The fact that I went straight onto the foreigners wing was, it was okay because I went into a cell with a French guy and a German, and I spoke fairly good French, so I was able to communicate fairly easily, and there were a few Brits on the wing, so I get introduced to all the British pretty quickly, and me being me, I sort of end up deciding that, for the sake of us foreigners, I think we need a little gang, so start getting all the foreigners together. I had ended up with a few Russians around me. We made a pact with some Colombians on the other wing, who I'm still in contact with now, and became very friendly with some Colombians. And between us and the Colombians, we developed, I developed a gang called Eurobanda. Banda in Spanish is the word for gang, So I called it Eurobanda as a joke, because all the gangs out there had names, and ours was Eurobanda. It kind of started to take over the wing, and the Egyptian and the Arabs that were running the wing didn't really like this, so that became a bit of a contentious point, and I didn't want to spend what was possibly going to be 25 years in prison in Ecuador. The fact that I'd actually been arrested in Ecuador, I was kind of happy about, because I knew if I'd been arrested back in Britain, I would have, without a shadow of a doubt, I would have been 100% Category A, maximum security prisoner, in the harshest, most high secure prisons in Britain. You know, Belmarsh, Long Lartin, all of that. You know, no chance of getting out early, no chance of escape. So my idea was, the fact I'd been arrested in Ecuador, I thought, well, I know how corrupt this place is. I can probably bribe my way out of prison, or I can certainly get the sentence reduced, hopefully get out of here sooner than I would in England, or I can escape because the security's crap.
Where was your girlfriend at this point?
Yeah, so she gets taken to the women's prison, and you know, I promised her, I said, look, I will do whatever I have to do to get you out of here, which I did. I ended up having to basically go guilty and say, yeah, it was me. It was me that was trafficking the drugs. She's nothing to do with it. I spent 25 grand on her, getting her out. I ended up in total spending about £130,000 on lawyers and bribes, you know, paying off the judge, paying off the police, paying off whoever I could, to not get 25 years and to get her released. So she gets released after 3 or 4 months. And I said to her, I said, please do not go back to Britain, because the British police will arrest you. They will try and convict you, because I'm not there and I just know how the British police work. And she kept saying, I'm not involved, I've got a young daughter, why would they arrest me? I haven't done anything wrong, which was true. Sure enough, she goes back to Britain against my wishes and my recommendation, and pretty much as soon as she arrives back in Stroud, she gets arrested, and they end up sentencing her to 13 years in a British prison. And on the most basic of evidence, I mean, just the most circumstantial evidence you can believe. The British police said that she'd been transporting drugs for me, which she never, ever once did. Never. Why would I use my girlfriend when I had dozens of passengers, mules? I'm hardly going to put my girlfriend in risk and use her, am I? The evidence that the police had for this was the fact that they found traces, only traces, mind you, traces of cocaine on some of her luggage. The bags that she was using were rucksacks that I had given her. There was cocaine all around me, all over everything, nearly all of the time. Of course there's going to be traces of cocaine on those bags. I mean, honestly, it really pisses me off, even now, when I think about it and what she went through when she shouldn't have ever gone to prison. Or at best, maybe a couple of years, a year or two.
How much time did she serve in a British prison?
She did 7 years. And I mean, what? 7 years for what? For being my girlfriend, basically. I mean, just absolutely outrageous. Her legal team in Britain must have been absolutely shit. I mean, I'd said to her, look, if you need me to write any statements or say that you were in no way involved, get your legal team to contact me, because after she went back to Britain, she kind of stopped contact with me after a while, because her legal team said, you need to cut contact with this guy. You know, which I understand. I understand the reasons. I understand the way they were thinking, and you know, they were obviously trying to make it look as though it was all me, which it was. But they didn't do a very good job, I must say. God's sake. So, yes, she did 7 years. And needless to say, I've only spoken to her once since she got out. And that was because I happened to bump into her in the street in Stroud. And she said hi and then turned away and walked away. So I can't really blame her for being pretty pissed off with me. God.
Well, she missed 7 years of her daughter's life just because she was in a relationship with you.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's just... honestly, I could go on about this all day, but I mean, how the hell did that happen? Jesus Christ. So, that's what happened to her. I did try and escape from the prison in Quito. In conjunction with the Colombian guys, we bought a cell on the Ecuadorian wing, because the end of the wing was basically the exterior wall of the prison. So we bought the penultimate cell obviously on the ground floor, and started digging a tunnel out of there. And this prison in Quito was old, built in 1850 or something like that. and it was like a rabbit warren underneath the prison where so many people had dug tunnels out of there. I mean, there have been dozens of escapes out of there. People have got out through, all manner of ways. And we were planning all sorts of ways of getting out there. Everything from a helicopter lift off the roof to an RPG strike on the exterior wall. Because the Colombian guys that I was hooked up with were ex-FARC. Anyway, we opted for the cheaper one, the tunnel. And the guards got wind of me planning a fuga masiva, as they called it, which was a massive escape. And me and the Colombians all got split up and sent to different prisons all around the country. And I got sent to the 4th most dangerous prison in South America. It's probably the 1st most dangerous now. But at the time it was the 4th most dangerous in Guayaquil, which is in the south of Ecuador. It's the big port city of the country. And that was completely different kettle of fish, that place. Quito wasn't particularly gang controlled, but the second prison in Guayaquil was absolutely, totally and utterly gang controlled. The interior of the prison was the gang's territory. There were 2 gangs at war with each other. 8,000 prisoners split almost equally in half, so 4,000 in each half of the prison. 26 wings, and there was a full-on war going on between the 2 gangs. They were all out to kill each other. So there was like 5 or 6 murders a week, bodies turning up in the rubbish, heads here, limbs all over the place. I mean, there were gunfights on a frequent basis.
When you say gunfights, there were gunfights actually in the prison?
There were gunfights nearly, not daily, but I mean, I was involved in one of the worst gunfights in the prison at that time. What happened was a 3rd gang came in to the prison onto the wing that I was on, and this destabilised the dynamics of the prison. So the original gang that was in there, who were called the Cubanos, obviously didn't like the fact that this new gang was looking to take over the place. They were called the Choneros. They're from a town called Choni in Ecuador, in the Manta region, or Manabí region. And they are now, the Choneros are now Ecuador's biggest, one of their biggest gangs. And the leader of that gang was on the wing that I was on. He's now dead. I became quite friendly with him, very friendly with his brothers. I still am to this day. So the original gang, the Cubanos, decided to take these guys out and kill them all. So they bring in a hit squad. And on this particular evening, we used to get locked into the wing, but our cell doors were open 24 hours a day, because the gang basically controlled the inside of the prison in conjunction with the guards, who were all paid off. The director of the prison was paid off. And then the police controlled the perimeter. Inside of the prison was pretty much just, do what you want, as long as you didn't piss off the gang, because if you did, you're going to get killed, probably. There were shops in there, restaurants, families living in there with their kids. Your visits would come in, they'd come into your cell, into your wing. It was just completely different to British prisons. So anyway, going back to this gunfight, the Cubanos had decided to take out the Choneros. About 9:30 at night, mid-October, I was cooking some food, me and the German guy, cooking spaghetti bolognese. And one of the Choneros asked me for a plate of food, because he quite liked the cooking that we did. So I said, yeah, no problem. So I went to collect his plate to give him the food, put the food in the plate, took it back, knocked on the door of his room, and the other gang, the Cubanos, had obviously been watching me do this and used me as cover to kill this guy. So one of them's come up behind me and opened fire over my right shoulder, shot this guy straight in the face, blown the back of his head out right in front of me, killed him instantly, obviously. And I've just run to my cell, and a 2-hour gunfight ensued. At least one other person was killed. There were about 15 injured. It lasted for 2 hours until the ammunition ran out. And then the police came in and tortured everybody for another 2 hours until they found out what had happened. And I mean, when I say tortured, I mean they were drowning people, electrocuting people, discharging rifles up the side of their heads next to their ears in order to find out what had gone on. I mean, I saw gang members, gang leaders crying, begging for their lives. Because the police would come in and execute gang members. They would just take them out into the exercise yard if they were causing too much trouble and just shoot them in the head and say they tried to escape. So that was pretty bad. And the police, after they'd worked out what had gone on and they'd taken out the remainder of the choneros and put them on their own wing, they herded about 130 of us into what was the exit of the wing onto the exercise yard where one of the guys had been killed. And he was a pretty big guy, and there was a lot of blood there. So they herded nearly 130 of us in there and made us stand in his blood as a lesson. And I mean, you can imagine the smell, the iron. You can almost taste it in your mouth. I still remember it now. And then Cat Ninetail whipped us as we were coming out of there, and then left us to it, basically. You know, that's just one example. I'm sure you've seen the massacres in the news recently in the prison in Ecuador. One of my friends was beheaded, and I was sent a picture of someone holding my friend's head, and I was sent some of the most brutal videos from those massacres that have just happened over there, of people just getting hacked to pieces. One of the worst videos that I was sent, they had just killed about 5 or 6 people. They had them on the ground, they were chopping their heads off, and they cut this guy's heart out. This is all on film. They hold this guy's heart up to the camera, and it's still beating. One of them laughs because he thinks it's funny. The heart stops. He shakes it, and it starts beating again. And they're in hysterics. They think it's all I mean, it's just stuff that you're never going to forget. Horrific. And in my time there, I mean, I saw people killed every which way you can imagine. Knifed, beaten to death, shot, blown up, hand grenades, people getting hung. I found one of my best friends hung. Steve, English guy. Because that's what the gang used to do. That was one of their favourites. To make it look like a suicide, they'd come in there, choke you until you passed out, and then they'd hang you and leave you there. I mean, I even saw them hang people that they'd already shot and stabbed, and then they'd hang them up and to try and get away with saying it was suicide. I mean, yeah, just nuts. Yeah, so I'm now in Guayaquil. I get to the 6-year point of my sentence. You know, I get sentenced to 12. The British police wanted me to be sentenced to 25. But I managed to bribe and pay my way down to 12 years, which they were really annoyed about. But, so at the halfway point of my sentence, which was pretty normal to get released in Ecuador, they suddenly bring in a new system of merit-based remission. And they said, well, you know, the merits are based on courses that you need to have done. I said, well, how am I supposed to have done the courses? This is like gladiator school, this place. I'm lucky I'm alive. There aren't any courses to do. What are you talking about? So in the end, I end up getting 9% remission on 12 years. And a big part of that was the fact I'd tried to escape from Quito, and, you know, I'd formed a gang there and all sorts of other stuff that I got up to. And at this point, not long before I got told that I was basically having to restart my sentence and do another 5.5 years, my mother died, then my auntie died, then my cousin died, then I found Steve hung in his cell, then I contracted tuberculosis. I mean, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And in the end, the place was so bad and so out of control that the government built a whole new prison estate, and we got transferred en masse on the 1st of December 2013, I think it was, into a prison that they hadn't even finished building properly yet, which was horrible. It was terrible. It was the most secure prison that I've ever been in, even more so than the ones in Britain, because they literally stripped us and put us in there with flip-flops, a t-shirt and shorts. We weren't allowed any visits. There were no telephones in there. We weren't allowed razors. We weren't allowed letters. We weren't allowed magazines or books or radios or TV. There was nothing in there at all, and they wouldn't let anything in or anything out of the prison. No visits came for a month, not even the embassy. That was one of the worst Christmases I ever had in my life. One of the only times I ever vaguely contemplated suicide, because I was that depressed and just thought I was never going to get out. I thought, well, what's the point in carrying on? But I did.
Did anyone ever visit you? Did your family come and visit you in Ecuador?
No, I told my family I didn't want them to come out to Ecuador, A, because it was such a long way to travel, particularly not my mum being in ill health. But just all the stress of it, and then coming into a prison like that to see me in prison, I was just like, no way. But a couple of friends came out. Quito was actually okay for visits. The visits would come into the wing. You could buy your own cell, which I did. They were like $2,000. So I had mine, replastered, retiled, all new electrics put in there, lights, electric shower, cooker, TV, DVD, pretty plush cell. Because I thought I was going to be there. I didn't think I was going to get transferred. Bought a few other cells, used to rent them out for visit days, because the visits would come in again into the cells. So I realised that it was a business and I could rent them out on visit days and make money. So I became a property baron in prison. And whilst in Quito, I actually met... we set up like a tour of the prison in conjunction with a Scottish girl who was over there doing a PhD on prisons. And I got her to put up a load of flyers in the hostels and stuff around Quito, and it became super, super popular. Every visit day, which was all Wednesday, all of Saturday and all of Sunday, we would get anywhere from 10 to 20 people coming in, tourists, to come in, and we'd give them a guided tour of the prison, tell them a few stories, and they'd love it. And every other week on a Saturday, you would be allowed your girlfriend or any female to stay in the cell with you overnight. So you kick out, if you own the cell, you kick out the other guys who are living with you, and you could have your girlfriend, your wife, prostitute, or any female just stay the night overnight on Saturday and then leave on Sunday evening. So if it happened to be a bunch of girls that were visiting, I would say to them, you can stay overnight in a South American prison, totally secure in the cell with me, and leave the next day. I said, where on earth are you ever going to get that experience ever again in a real working prison? And believe you me, there were so many girls stayed overnight. I'd kick all the other guys out, and I'd sometimes be in there with 3 or 4 girls, get some drinks in, some coke sometimes, and just have a big party. And it was great. But 2 of the girls that turned up were from Manchester, and one of them was a model. And I ended up, we really hit it off. This girl called Becky, and she went away. Her and a friend Becky and Nikki. So they went away after spending a couple of weeks in Quito. And about 3 or 4 weeks after, she turned up on her own back in the prison looking for me. And she ended up spending 6 months in Quito, coming in on every visit day. We were totally in love. And in the end, she couldn't extend her visa anymore. And unfortunately, she had to leave. But I'm still in contact with her now. We were very much in love. It was pretty cool. But of course, then I ended up getting transferred to Guayaquil, and there was none of that, and it was just very different. Not much fun at all.
What regrets do you have?
I would definitely do it all again, the same, just because it has led on to some good things. I suppose if I could have led a different life, I would have done. But at the end of the day, that was always my life, or has been my life, and that's the way it was. I regret never seeing my mother again. I still find that difficult to talk about. And, obviously the effect it had on my family. Do I regret selling drugs wholesale to a lot of people? Yes and no. I mean, it is the individual's choice if they want to take drugs or not. And I strongly believe that all drugs should be legalised, manufactured under licence, heavily taxed to offset the healthcare burden and ill effect on society, and controlled. Because until they take out the financial gain for criminals, then this is going to be a problem that's going to just keep on going. The war on drugs is a complete fallacy, and has just made things worse, if anything.
Peter, what next for you?
I've got a guy in New York at the moment. He's working on the screenplay for the pilot episode of hopefully a Netflix series. I'm writing the prequel to my first book. The first book was called El Infierno. It's published by Ebury Penguin. You can buy it on Amazon. Obviously, the prequel is a bit delicate to write because of talking about things that maybe haven't been prosecuted for. And I've set up an import-export company to bring in cacao to make my own chocolate products. My long-term aim is to set up a company producing a range of chocolate products with Ecuadorian cacao, because it's some of the best on the planet. So I've got, several things going on. All of them legit.
Peter Tritton's book is called El Infierno: Drugs, Gangs, Riots, and Murder.
Remarkable Stories is made by Boat Radio. It is written and produced by John Herlig and Mike McDowell. Our stories are edited in the Boat Radio studios in sunny Mallorca. If you like today's show, consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen. For everyone at Remarkable Stories, I am Elizabeth Schrey saying thanks for listening.